Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A lot of buzz over the last couple of hours with an interview coming out with Jon Gruden saying not only is he interested in getting back into the coaching game, he's interested in doing it at the college football level. Now, we had kind of a conversation on Sunday afternoon about potential candidates for this Florida Gators head coaching job. And again, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. This head coaching job ain't even open yet. But I think we know it's going to be open over the next couple of weeks or months. Let's have the conversation about Jon Gruden. I want to preface before we even get into this conversation. I don't even know if I'm necessarily banging the table for Jon Gruden to be a candidate for this job. That being said, I know Jon Gruden's a damn good football coach. And if he's interested in coaching at the collegiate level, I think there's really only one program that he would be interested in going coaching, and that's for this Florida Gators program. Want to get into, kind of some of the pros and cons of Jon Gruden potentially being a candidate for this Florida Gators program. Now, before we get into it, as always, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, we had this conversation Sunday afternoon. It was littered with comments and different coaching candidates that you guys would like to see. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on Jon Gruden potentially being the next coach for the Florida Gators. Did not wake up Wednesday morning thinking we'd have this conversation, but here we are. So let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Obviously, something we're going to be talking a lot about over the next couple of weeks and months. And without further ado, let's get into it. And I think the best way to go about doing this is just some pros and cons. And let's start with the pros. Why Jon Gruden could potentially make sense as being the next head coach for this Florida program. I want to start with he's just a damn good football coach. You don't win Super Bowls. You don't have multi 10 plus win seasons and playoff runs if you're not good at coaching the game of football. And Jon Gruden's one of that. And I think one of the more interesting conversations about Jon Gruden potentially being the next coach for Florida is the potential staff that would be around Jon Gruden, right? You talk about all the relationships, not only former players that he's coached, but former coaches that have worked under him. I mean, Jon Gruden has made some really good hires over the last couple of decades during his head coaching tenure in the NFL. That's something Billy Napier just flat out failed at. And you talk about just the lack of player development, the poor coaches that he had brought in over the last couple of years. One of the most unspoken conversations in terms of finding elite head coaches at the college football level is how well can they hire around them. You look at Kirby Smart, you look at Nick Saban, those coaches have done such a good job in terms of coaching or hiring coaches that kind of build this program and are really successful. Billy Napier, obviously a horrible job at it. I would think Jon Gruden would have a lot of pull and be able to build a kind of really fascinating coaching staff within this Florida Gators program, which again, your former head coach Billy Napier just wasn't able to do. I think secondly, and another really important conversation to have is, there's not necessarily over the last couple of years, there's been kind of a strong track record more at the coordinator spots in terms of coaches coming from the NFL to the collegiate level and having a lot of success. You think back to Michigan, Jesse Minter, and Mike McDonald. You look at USC and UCLA with Coach Danton Lynn. These coaches that jump down from the NFL ranks to the collegiate ranks, more at the coordinator level than the head coaching level, it's shown that it's been pretty successful. I think the big question mark you might have is, all right, well, Jon Gruden hasn't coached college football in this century. Yeah, that's 100% a concern, but how big of a concern is probably worth talking about in terms of, hey, where is the game of college football right now? NIL, transfer portal, it is kind of resembling kind of an NFL program, an NFL or a professional model, if you will, in terms of managing your resources, in terms of going to the transfer portal, quote unquote, free agency and filling your roster. 10 years ago, I think there'd be significant growing pains for NFL coaches moving down to the collegiate ranks and having to recruit and having to coach a younger crop of players. I think with how professional the college football landscape has been over the last couple of years, I don't know how many growing pains there would be for someone like Jon Gruden because again, where we are in college football right now, it does resemble how the NFL works in terms of free agency, in terms of the money that's being handed out and kind of thrown around. So I don't know how much I should say the growing pains would necessarily play a role. And I think finally, and I think this is really important, what made Urban Meyer so special at Florida, like this dude was about as maniacal and hungry to win football games as it gets. You look at Jon Gruden, I don't know if there's a more fiery, passionate coach about the sport of football, especially having taken a couple of years off than Jon Gruden. What were our biggest frustrations about Dan Mullen and Billy Napier? It just didn't seem to matter as much to them as it mattered to a guy like Urban Meyer. And I mean competitive in multiple different sets, right? In practice, on games, but also on the recruiting trail, like winning in all purposes of this sport. Like you look at Kirby Smart, you look at what made Urban Meyer so great. Those dudes they're maniacal in terms of winning in every facet. Jon Gruden would probably fall into that category. And quite frankly, Billy Napier, Dan Mullen, I don't know if they kind of had that energy within that Florida Gator program. Now, getting into the cons, I think it starts with the off the field stuff. And I'll kind of let people's personal opinions kind of dictate how they feel about that. Obviously, the emails and it doesn't look great optically. There's some baggage there. What I would say about the baggage, though, is if you are against Jon Gruden being your head coach because of the baggage, I feel like there's a lot of Florida fans that don't mind Urban Meyer potentially coming back to coach Florida. There's plenty of baggage with Urban Meyer as well. And so I look at the baggage and say, look, we've seen a lot of really good football coaches have some off the field baggage. Guys like Hugh Freeze or Coach Sark at Texas, they end up kind of figuring it out and being really good football coaches. So I'll kind of set that aside. I think another larger question is the translation between all right, I just coached grown men for the last 25 years of my coaching career. Now I'm coming down to the collegiate ranks and coaching 18 to 21 year olds. Does that style translate the way you coach players, the way you develop players? That certainly would be a question on the recruiting trail. Again, I don't know how big of a factor it is because the relationship recruiting basis, it's not necessarily that anymore. It's a lot more around NIL and potentially NFL futures. Could Jon Gruden even be potentially a really good recruiter at the collegiate ranks? Like, what do these kids care most about when they're committing to a program? Yes, NIL is playing a role, but I think the probably continues to be the biggest care for these kids. Hey, am I going to get developed to be an NFL draft pick? Am I going to have a career in the NFL? What better coach to sell that vision than a coach that has coached 20 plus years in the NFL, has won a Super Bowl at the highest level of this sport? And so I wonder if Jon Gruden could even be a potentially good recruiter because of that NFL background. I'm sure he's going to hire a staff or would hire a staff that would have a ton of NFL guys that are within this Florida Gators program. Again, am I saying Jon Gruden should be the number one choice for this Florida program? No, I think Lane Kiffin would be my number one choice. I think Coach Trink would probably be my second choice. I do think it's an interesting conversation to have. We'll see kind of how it plays out. But Jon Gruden, he checks a lot of boxes. And I think it starts with just being a really good football coach that knows how to run definitely an NFL franchise, but would probably run a pretty damn tight ship in terms of a collegiate program as well. I'm probably a little bit more on board with the vision than maybe some other Florida Gator fans. But again, I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. I know there's so many different ways that you can kind of see this potential hire. So let it fly in the comment section. Again, there's so much that needs to play out over the next couple of weeks and months. We're talking about a head coaching job that's not even available yet. So let it fly in the comment section, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me. Wanted to hop on, just kind of have the conversation. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.